Hello, everybody. I'm Jason Snell. That's Dan Morin over there. Over there. I
Where
don't
am
know.
I?
I don't know where you are. You're east,
Boy,
east of
do I
me.
not know.
Apple results just happened. Just happened. Well, the results. I mean, really, it was last quarter they happened, right? But now
Now we know.
we know.
Knowing is more than half the
And
battle here.
remember, they warned everybody. They're like, "No, it's bad. We can't make iPhone Pros fast enough." And I mean, would you say it was bad? It was literally their second best quarter ever, and they made like $20 billion in profit.
It's the
But
growth,
but
Jason. It's
everybody was
all about the
sad because it's all
growth.
about growth. It is all about
It's
growth,
all
dude.
about growth. What an interesting time to be alive. Oh, you only made $117 billion. Poof!
Down with you. I watched again my traditional 30 minutes where I watch CNBC once a quarter, and which is hilarious as you might expect.
Mhm.
And I'm amazed that they got the analysts who are in the bag for Apple and the analysts who think that Apple is terrible and they're gonna find the most negative thing. It's like I don't even know why I watch that, except it does actually entertain me to see them do that. And
You're
there's always
right.
the guy who's like at Apple Park and he's like, I just talked to Tim Cook and he said financial headwinds, and then he was blown away by the financial headwinds.
You remember the Daily Show used to have this great bit, recurring bit between Stephen Colbert and Steve Carell called Even Steven, where they would just argue opposite sides of things. I feel like that's kind of what CNBC has going on there. Pro Apple, anti Apple. Oh yes, no, yes.
Exactly. It's the
Yep.
yelling heads or whatever it is. Hey, why don't we look at some charts and
Let's look
talk
at some
about what
charts.
happened? That's what people are here for, right? They don't
People are
care
here for
about
the
us. They just
charts.
want the
They tune in
charts.
for the charts.
All
I
right, chart
understand.
time. Chart time. Boop, boop, doo. We're going to start with total Apple revenue. You can also see all these charts yourself at sixcolors.com, by the way, which is where we do this. Um, you know, uh, $117.2 billion in revenue in a quarter is staggering. It's just down from 123.9 last year. That's the bottom line. When you're a Wall Street person and you're focused on growth, you want to see growth year over year. You don't want to see down year over year. I think we all understand why this happened. Also, there was really an inflationary growth period there for Apple. Apple will also tell you that, so not a record quarter in any way. It's the first time in a little while.
Yeah.
Apple will tell you that they would have grown if not for foreign exchange. Although I had to laugh. One of the people on CNBC was like, everybody knows about foreign exchange. Everybody has to deal with foreign exchange. I wish they'd stop talking about foreign exchange. But it's Apple's way of saying, that they feel like the fundamentals of their business are actually strong and that the issues here have a lot more to do with what they keep saying, Dan, in that call. It's financial headwinds and the global macroeconomic climate.
Yep. I was gonna say here are your buzzwords for this quarter. I would throw out constant currency, which is what you just described, which is basically not dealing with foreign exchange, macroeconomic, and headwinds. Yeah,
Yeah.
we had a lot of headwinds.
Yeah. Yeah.
The ship is sailing into difficult waters.
Macroeconomic climate.
Yeah, we had both tough and what was the advantageous compares too. So we'll get into that.
Yeah, this is also, I should say, this is a 14-week quarter, so it's actually better than it might have been.
Yeah, well, exactly, and that's worth noting too, because they talked about that when they compared to last year's quarter. Actually, they specifically talked about the 14 weeks when comparing to the upcoming March quarter, but they downplayed it when comparing it to last quarter.
Gotta love
So,
it. Gotta love it. So anyway, they didn't make a lot of money, but but it's complicated, right? It's complicated. I'm gonna move on to the Apple profit slide here. 30 billion. Sorry, I said 20. That was my mistake. I missed it by 10 billion.
10
It's
billion,
30,
10 billion here, 10 billion there.
30
Pretty soon,
billion
you're
in
talking about real
profit.
money.
So when I make these charts, I manually set the height of the chart, and sometimes they blow it out, and I have to reset the high point on the chart for every chart. I had to do that like with one chart this time. But still 30 billion in profit again, and this is going to be a recurring theme. The second highest, because remember the holiday quarter is always Apple's best quarter. You can see it here with all these spikes every four. There's a spike holiday quarter. That's what it's all about.
Right.
Seasonality.
Yeah, looking here at like the first, right, like you go back, so skip last quarter, right?
It's up
and
year
still,
over year from 21, right? It's literally the second
exactly.
biggest quarter they've ever had.
Yeah.
It's just not the biggest because that was last time. But are we surprised? I think we are not surprised. And then here's the one that I think is now view these charts through the eyes of Wall Street. And one of the things you'll see is Wall Street's all about growth. This is the year-over-year growth chart, where all the changes between those bars become their own bars. They get their own, they become a real boy. And you can see it down 5%. It has been, what is that, 4 years?
Jason, I like to call this this is the good bad chart. If it's below the line, it's bad. If it's above the line, it's good. It's good. There you go. I just simplified the Wall Street analyst job for all of you. You are all now Wall Street analysts.
Yeah. Yeah. That's about it. I mean, they don't like it. Like, they like it when this chart goes up because it's growth of growth. They love that. They get a little antsy when it's, not when it's decelerating. They like to say growth. But if you look at it, I mean, this is what, when people are upset about Apple's results, I think Apple did a good job back in November or whatever in freaking everybody out so that they would expect this, because they knew that way this wasn't a surprise, right? Like, everybody knew this was coming.
I think Apple missed a real chance here to do some viral marketing tie-in with their new show, Shrinking, by saying that this is all just promoting. We're just shrinking our growth this quarter to promote our new Harrison Ford, Jason Segel's Apple
fault.
TV Plus show.
Jason Segel's fault. Anyway, 4 years since that 2019 fiscal, so holiday 2018, and then the first quarter of 2019. We'll see. And then here's the pie chart. My one pie chart that I do. It's tricky. I want the text just so I have to move the text every single time. I can't use
that share
feature for
the share keeps changing a little bit every time. A little bit.
Yeah, well, Numbers has a feature that'll let you put the text with it, but it doesn't work right. I don't like it. So I do it myself. There's a hand lettered. I mean, my hand clicked on the thing and dragged it slightly on each of them. Anyway, you can see here again, it's the usual Apple story. More than half of Apple's revenue comes from the iPhone. Services just kind of keeps on growing, right?
Yeah, even despite the fact that the quarter was down, services was one of the two bright spots, basically.
One of the two that went up. Yeah.
So, that's, I mean,
and
services.
Somebody asked when was the last time the iPad beat the Mac, and I don't actually, I should look that up.
But it's happened. They've gone back and forth a couple times, I think.
Yeah, but
you could probably figure it out from your little, your next chart there with your shares.
Oh yeah,
but you have to kind of stare at it, I guess.
I guess I could. Well,
that's a bit of a magic eye trick
boy,
to try
Dan,
and
how do you know what
out.
my next chart is? But okay, here's this one, percentage by revenue line, and yeah, it's hard to tell. There have been moments definitely where the iPad has crossed over the Mac.
2021 maybe.
But yeah, I'm looking at my spreadsheet now, and iPad and Mac revenue.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the Mac is the Mac business has been
so good lately.
It's very steady for the most part, and when it's gone up, it's gone up well, but then it never drops below kind of a certain point.
It was the last time the iPad revenue was above the Mac revenue was exactly 7 years ago.
7, wow.
Holiday quarter 2015, fiscal 2016 quarter 1.
Wow.
That's the last time.
That's okay.
It's a long time.
That's a long time. Yeah.
And that has to do with no Macs coming out and iPads coming out.
Right. So those Mac announcements that we just got are obviously not factored into this quarter. They were
supposed to
come
out last quarter, but they didn't.
Exactly. So that's
the reports suggest.
That is where your tough compare comes in, because there's no new Macs in the December holiday quarter there.
Yeah. Speaking of the Mac, let's go to the Mac slides here. Mac revenue. Apple had a real good run there with the Mac of setting the best quarter of whatever quarter ever for a while, but the Mac really did take a tumble. And I mean, there were no new Macs, that's not going to help. And they said there was a tough compare as well, but there are no new Macs and
pent up demand.
I will say 7.7 billion for the Mac, being a disappointment. It is amazing that we've gotten to that point, because that would have been a record up until Q4 of 2020.
Yeah. Yep.
All-time record.
Basically Apple Silicon.
Yeah.
Roughly.
Yeah. So but if we go on to the next one, you'll see it here. There's a huge spike, which a lot of people have said was probably at least helped by the pandemic and certainly by the arrival of Apple Silicon. So they sold a lot of Macs. They talk about expanding their install base a lot, and I'm sure they did that, which is adding new users and not just doing a one-to-one replacement. Right? If you retire a Mac and buy a Mac, your install base doesn't go up. If you sell a Mac to a person who didn't have a Mac before, your install base does go up. So the install base is increasing. And Apple has lots of wins in various countries that they like to trumpet, where the install base was growing, great guns. But you can see here the real Mac story is that the Mac had a very, very, very good run, and you could argue it's still sort of in it, but it had that 10% down a couple quarters ago, and now a 30% down this quarter. Again, the M1 MacBook Pros came out last year at that quarter, which was a very much a pent-up demand product that everybody rushed out to buy. And the M2 MacBook Pros not only are, I would argue, less exciting, but didn't come out that quarter anyway. They came out this quarter. So not surprising, but just putting it in perspective, the Mac is actually doing, like that previous slide said, doing really well, but in the context of the growth it's shown over the last 2 years, it was their biggest down quarter in a long time. Doesn't even fit on the chart. It's my chart doesn't go back that far to a minus 29. iPad. Hey Dan,
had a good year.
The iPad, another highlight for the iPad, huh?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there were some new iPads. I have to cast my mind back.
There were some new
iPads. Even though I think what's fascinating is right, like everybody talks about the iPad lineup and the fact that the iPad lineup is a little weird and confusing, but that is clearly not stopping consumers who are still buying iPads. I mean, there's no expectation about which iPad inbuilt into this, right? Which iPads they're buying, but they are buying iPads, and that after several quarters of pretty stagnant growth, this is a nice jump for them.
Last time the iPad sold more than 9.4 billion in a quarter. Any guesses?
2010, 2011, like early on, right?
It's 9 years ago, 14.
14, okay.
Yeah. Long time.
That's a long time.
Yeah,
a lot has happened in the iPad, and yet not enough.
The truth is they've got quite a little, I've said this before, but like there's quite a little business bubbling there. If you look at the little black line on this chart, which is the 4-quarter moving average, the iPad has gone since 2020. It shifted from being a $5 billion a quarter, so a $20 billion a year business, to being more like an $8 billion a quarter, so $32 billion a year business.
And an interesting timing there too, right? Because that is basically pandemic, roughly. Yeah. And I think that has helped a lot. I mean, obviously in the early days, remote learning and people wanting stuff they could use around their house, but
it's still going.
Yeah, people are still want that, even, sort of as the pandemic shifts into a new phase. I think there's still a lot of people who are happy to use an iPad for most of the stuff that they need to do.
Yeah, and there's I've got the change slide up now, which basically 30%, it's a great number. They had that as we said, that kind of explosive growth second half of 20 and into 21, where the iPad sales were up year over year by a whole lot.
I think the other thing I think they called out here too, as I recall, I'll have to look at my notes for a second, was that I think one of the benefits was they had supply chain issues, I want to say a year ago
and not this time, maybe.
And not this time, which I think is part of what helped the iPad.
I can't chart this, but I will also say that they said that Mac and iPad will both be down next quarter. So
yes,
due to tough compares and
your charts don't go in the future.
Headwinds and Mac I haven't got that feature yet.
Next time.
I need to add that.
That's the AI. That's the AI, Jason. We'll talk about that later.
I came up with an awesome new, just outside the charts for a second, I came up with an awesome new automation that I decided to do because I get tired of retyping in the numbers. And I know it's a little thing, but I also don't want to get them wrong. And I came up with an automation that you point it at the PDF of Apple's results, and it pulls out the numbers and puts them in it puts them on the clipboard, and I paste them into my spreadsheet. Work great, except for one thing, which is Apple uses a slightly different template for Q1 because they have 4 columns. They have a sequential compare and a year over year. Or they have a year over year and like a year to date compare on their little charts. And since it's Q1, it's a different layout, and my script didn't work. So next time.
Curse you,
I
Q1.
did think of it at the last minute, and I'm going to download some historical PDFs and make sure that I cover all contingencies. But I'll automate this thing yet. Apparently, numbers is Apple scriptable, so I might even be able to do that. But it's probably easier to just put it on the clipboard and paste it since I'm using numbers anyway, and I have to manually adjust where the text goes on the pie chart and the whole thing. iPhone, obviously the biggie, as we saw on the pie chart, more than half of Apple's revenue, and again here we have just by a little bit, but again second best iPhone revenue quarter ever, just not up to the standard set by last year is essentially the case here. And this is the big story, and it's the story that Apple warned about, that they had factory problems, and it was the factories that make their most lucrative iPhones, the iPhone Pro and iPhone Pro Max, and that therefore they were struggling with not being able to meet demand. Now, if you want to listen, the part that if you're an analyst who that is scared about Apple's future and the future of the tech sector. I heard somebody like this on CNBC in my half hour of watching CNBC for the quarter, is because Apple couldn't supply enough to meet demand, Apple doesn't know what the demand was. And Tim Cook on the call said something about, how it's kind of an art and you have to do it in hindsight. But that means that if you're an analyst, you can't just write it off. We don't know if there's demand for the iPhone or if people just decided to stop buying iPhones, which is silly, I would say. But it is true that there's no way to measure sales that didn't get made.
Happen. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice? That's like charts that look into the future.
There's probably a shortcut for that.
Oh man, just point me at the PDF of the future results and I'll
there you go.
I'll parse it. By the way, I was trying to do PDF to text and then parsing it that way, and it turned out a more effective way was actually to turn it into an image, crop the image, and then use live text to.
What a world!
Somebody asked Tim Cook about AI, and he was like, "We're on it. We love it."
Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, he does.
Year-over-year iPhone revenue change, and you can see it here. This is something that I actually think you can see the larger cycle happening here of the iPhone, where you have these big boost moments. Like we did at the end of 2020, where the iPhone models for that year do really well, and then you have 2 years where they kind of are slack, and then there's another big iPhone update,
right.
And that's a macro cycle inside Apple's quarterly cycle where they've got the holiday quarter, and I think that the 8% down, it's not great, right? But Apple at least has a story to tell about why it was down.
Yeah, right. This isn't just like you said, having the supply chain issues that have come up. You don't need to be there thinking, like you said, people just don't want iPhones anymore. Yeah, everybody's decided they hate the iPhone. The iPhone is dead, right? Like that not borne out by the numbers. And Apple has a rationale for why that has happened. And at this point, we will have to wait and see what the next quarter rebounds.
We don't know if it's true. Maybe everybody just stopped buying iPhones because they didn't like them.
We don't know.
Services revenue. This is the one chart where I had to increase the top of it. Because it's a record again, 20.8. This is a very boring chart because it just keeps going up. It's not a bad chart, but a boring chart. I'm going to move to the next chart though, which
it took a little dip. It took a little dip briefly, but yeah, there we go. More stuff to get out of this one. Yeah, services. Right. So here's your shrinking again. Your shrinking growth.
Yep, Jason Segel.
Jason Segel.
What's wrong with that guy? A lot. You can see on Apple TV Plus. You can see there's a lot wrong with that guy.
Very clearly.
It's just they had a period of a lot of 30%ers, and then they had a lot of high teens, and then they went into another sort of like high 20s to 30. And the last 2 quarters have been like 5 or 6%. Now Apple will say foreign exchange.
Yeah, right.
But I get it. Like if you've got a subscription business and the dollar gets stronger, then
everybody outside
until you hike
US,
the prices, you will go down.
Which they have done, as we recall, in the last couple of months. So that's part of it. And I think the other part of it is probably that a lot of the stuff Apple's been rolling out in services is very additive in terms of its appeal right now. Right, new shows on Apple TV, new workouts on Fitness Plus. They haven't added a brand new service in quite some time, which is the kind of thing that pulls in new users. So I think, a lot of the people who are using these services already are happy with it, and it's not necessarily drawing in a ton of new customers. But I would assume they have some plans for that.
I would assume so. Um, let's see. Wearables, home, and accessories.
To the HomePod second generation, got a call out. It is obviously again not included in the.
Oh
Not
no!
including this.
Holding that back for the goodness of next quarter when
Literally
people are
nobody knew.
gonna
Uh,
knock down the doors and get that second
yeah,
generation HomePod.
not a big. I mean, the wearables I think is interesting because the holiday quarter is a big time. A lot of these things make good or like gift areas, right? Apple
Right.
Watches, AirPods, like all that stuff is pretty
Yeah, and you
positive
can
for
see the
gift giving.
seasonality here.
Yeah, absolutely, right. It's head and shoulders above
Yep.
other quarters,
Second
and
best quarter of all time.
they did
Again.
not seem to have the supply chain constraints with these that they had with other devices.
No.
I think in part, and this is, they kind of tried a lot of analyst questions trying to suss this out, but some of the AirPod stuff is definitely done outside of China. I think Vietnam and a couple other places. So I think they didn't have as much of an issue with the lockdown and other stuff that in China that complicated a lot of the supply chain. So perhaps that's just an easier product for them to move.
They said something about 2/3 of Apple Watch buyers were new to smartwatches, which is good because that's a category that expansion is what you want there, not replacement.
Yeah, I don't know. There's lots. Yeah,
Stretch
who
your
are
band.
the?
That's
What
how you
are
get the
the other
expansion.
smart? Yeah, what are the other smartwatches that people are buying?
Well,
I guess.
well,
and
they're
then,
just not.
yeah,
I mean, I think that the
yeah.
expansion there is new.
It's
They're
from
new to the whole category.
new to all. Yeah.
And I think
agree.
they said they're new to the whole category, and then they're definitely new to Apple Watch.
Yeah, I don't think they're getting a lot of converts from the Android Wear or whatever, but I also don't think there's that many Android Wear customers.
Right. No, it's like people who have a Casio. Here's the revenue change, and it's pretty stark, right? Like this one was riding high for quite a while, and has had 2 out of its last 3 down in the bad, as Dan pointed out. A technical
Bad side. Yep.
financial analyst term, the bad zone. There below 0 when it goes the other way. Makes a right turn instead of a left turn.
Don't go to the bad zone.
Don't do it. That's the big ones. I've got a couple other quick ones to show. Regional revenue, just showing you if you're curious about how Apple does around the world. The not flat, like rest of Asia Pacific and Japan, and these are also. And you might look at this and say, well, that's not all the parts of the world, but like, I think Middle East is in Europe, and I mean there's I don't know.
It is. I mean, the regions are kind of
because
arbitrary.
they don't want to detail it beyond this. So there's Japan and rest of Asia Pacific and China, and then there's Europe and Americas. And
there's at least one missing continent.
Yes, well,
in that list.
And I don't know, is Africa in the Europe category?
I have no idea.
Or rest of Asia Pacific.
I guess those would be
Pacific
the options.
Doesn't touch Africa. It can't be.
Yeah, they're not in Japan and they're not in the Americas. I feel like they're not in Greater China.
Rolled into Europe.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff rolled into Europe, but I think the sales are pretty negligible there currently.
Yeah, sure. And then here's the regional year-over-year growth, which again is one of those things where if you're in the green, it's actually bad. Sorry about that. I'm confusing you there, but it's a tough quarter all around in general.
Yeah, I mean, again, literally all the numbers down except I think for the iPad and services. That was about it.
And remember, foreign exchange headwinds. Just don't forget about the headwinds. And
Love
then finally,
my
I have my Greater China slide, just because a lot of people are interested in sort of how Apple's doing in China. It's a big market for them, and it was down after being up last quarter. They had a really good period in there, which coincides with sort of the really good iPhone sales. But they will all say, and that's my last slide, so I'm going to take us back to our little 2-shot here, if I can. Oh, I don't even know. What am I doing? There. That it's foreign exchange headwinds, just kept coming up. That a lot of, they feel like they saw a lot of growth in countries. And in the country, but the problem is then for your report, you convert it all to US dollars.
Right. Yeah.
So I think what they're saying, without going into, they mentioned, they rattled off a bunch of countries. They're in the transcript that I'm in the midst of posting to 6 Colors. If you don't want to listen to the call recording, you can just read the transcript. It's very exciting. It's not that exciting. But they talked about really doing well in certain countries. Tim Cook said India is a huge priority for them, which is
a lot of growth happening there, both from I think it's important for them as a market, obviously, but also as a place they're doing more business.
Yeah, they're going. The Apple retail is going in India.
Yep. Yep.
One of the challenges in India, my understanding is that it's a very federal system, and so the rules are different in the different states in India.
Yeah. There's a lot of governmental
Oh,
complexity there.
you were in
Yeah,
India for a
I
while,
was, and it has its own ways of doing business,
right?
and I think that is a very different environment for Apple to go
Well, they
into.
boasted that they just opened the Apple retail store, online store there in like 2020, and they're like, "Yeah, we did it." It's like, really, in 20 you? But that's how hard it is for
It's
them to
tough.
do stuff
It's
like
tough,
that in
right?
India.
Yeah.
As a
I mean, they had
non-Indian company,
a whole
there are
bunch of
lots of
stuff
rules,
where they couldn't sell phones that weren't made there and
and it
everything. Yeah.
depends on what state the person ordering is in too. That the rules are different.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a tricky environment, but it is one that I think they feel poised for a lot of growth. Um, I think they also talked a lot about supply chain stuff because a lot of people want to know, hey, Apple, you notice how having everything in China has a downside, right? And Tim danced around that a couple times, saying like, "Oh, we got all these other countries where we do stuff, and we're very excited that we're buying up all the inventory in that Arizona plant the TSMC is doing, and all of that stuff." Of course, downplaying the fact that still a huge chunk, overwhelmingly of Apple's supply chain is China-based. So it's not a problem that is easily untangled. It's going to take some time, but Apple clearly aware that that is a vulnerability they have.
Yeah. So any kind of top level takeaways for you with this one?
I mean, I think even though like the idea of inflation is kind of baked into the constant currency, clearly the environment that we're all in right now, where stuff costs a lot and the dollar is very strong, it has had an impact on Apple as well as everybody else. Um, the tech companies as a whole have had a rough go of it recently, although I guess Meta actually made some money, which is weird, but there you go. Also interesting to note, I mean, and this has been pointed out, John Gruber obviously pointed this out during Fireball. Apple pretty much the only big tech company not to go through huge layoffs
Yeah.
either,
They
which is a
asked
big cost cutting.
they asked him about that on the call, and he basically said, "We've cut costs and are being careful."
Yeah. And
But
I think
that's it.
he likes to talk about how they invest in people and stuff like that too. So I think he realizes that is a big strength, and it's also potentially something you need those people on the other side of this thing. So we'll see how that goes. And then, yeah, I don't know. There wasn't a lot of stuff to jump out this time. I mean, it's the rare down quarter, but I think what's important to take away from this going forward is keep in mind when we get back to this point a year from now, that compare is potentially pretty good, right? Because
That
down quarter means an up quarter next time around
yeah.
potentially for
This
growth. So
this year's take it on the chin is next year's opportunity to impress.
you got to get down to get up. I think is the saying.
Okay, the only way out is through
That's right. The only way out is down and then back up.
if you're in the core.
It's a dungeon crawl sort of thing. You got to go down and then you got to come up.
Also got a couple of or a quick comment here. Kieran Healy has a solution, which is look for more blogs from Uncle Eddie.
Eddie Q Newsletter of the Month Club, he says. Yeah, that's I guess that's a feature.
Man, the Apple jokes are rolling in from academia is all I'll say. Billo says after hours stock prices have only very slightly down, so they did a good job setting everybody's expectations. Yeah, I honestly think it's not as bad as I thought it would be, honestly. And I think that and I know it's so hard to think about it this way because when they do well and forecast down, the stock goes down, and you're
right.
like, but they did
Yeah.
well. It's all about pricing in the future. It's all like pricing and odds for betting. It's because the stock market is.
I expected
betting.
it to go up, frankly, in trading because it when it goes down when the performance is down, the stock goes up because people want to get it while it's cheap.
They were not super enthusiastic about next quarter either.
Yeah. There were some. They didn't forecast much, but they did say down, as you said, down for a couple things.
You want to talk about a good compare, though. Apple's good compare is to the rest of their industry.
Right. Yes.
It's a pretty good compare right now.
Yeah. So they said Mac iPad revenue should decline double digits year over year because of those challenging compares. iPhone should accelerate. Still got headwinds in digital advertising and mobile gaming. Service revenue will continue to grow. But March quarter year over year revenue performance will be similar to December. Yeah.
Agent
So
Monroe said Constant Currency is that Katie Lang song that was popular, right? Yeah, unfortunately, based on a Rolling Stones song called Financial Headwinds.
oh God, nothing like hearing Mick Jagger sing about financial headwinds. That'll
And
just keep you up at night.
and finally, Brent at the very beginning said, "This time I didn't listen to the call, so the suspense is killer. I hope we have, I don't know, relieved you of your suspense by showing you charts and talking about it."
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's about it. I think that's it. I think that's all you need from us, quite honestly, after Apple results call is a video half as long as the results call. But it felt
Yeah. Oh
like it
yeah.
flew by even faster than that.
That's right. Because we have better jokes.
Yeah. Sorry, Amit Daryanani and what Shannon
Shannon
Cross.
Cross's Tight 10 is just not. She needs a little tuning there.
No,
Work on
Wamsi
some new material.
Mohan needs another open mic night before he can
You
get to our
know,
level.
we all still miss Gene Munster.
I
So just
I
livening things up, asking about an Apple TV.
I hope to meet one of those analysts someday, and I can just be like, "Oh my God, I transcribe your calls." And
Huge fan, Tim.
yeah,
Huge
actually,
fan.
probably it's going to be something like Amit Daryanani, and he's going to be like, "Yeah, you ruined my Google results with all your transcripts."
You can tell him how he messed up all your numbers sheets. I had to adjust the chart height again, Tim.
Yeah,
Take it down a notch.
yeah. Come on, Tim. All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Dan, for participating.
Thank you for having me.
And sixcolors.com. Check it out. We do other videos. If you're a member, you get even more videos at certain levels. Well, I think you get more stuff. Members
You get
get more.
The more you
Be a
spend,
member.
the more you
Thanks.
get.
We have families to support. Dan has a little baby.
That's true.
Feed Dan's
Next
little
time
baby.
I'll trot out the baby as a sympathy play.
That's we're really missed an opportunity there. All right. Happy Events Day or release quarter results day. Happy Money Day, everybody. I don't own any Apple stock, so it doesn't matter to me that much, but I know it matters to a lot of you. And it is our little secular holiday. I'm going to stop talking now. Good night.
Adios.